Hello everybody, my name is Dratnos, and in today's video we have a dungeon and affix updates. This is something that initially we were thinking that affixes were unlikely to get a big look at War Within, because they said in one of the earlier interviews that it wasn't something they were likely to do basically, but it looks like that has changed. So greetings. With the War Within beta now underway, we are excited to share additional updates regarding dungeons and the affix system. Heroic and Mythic dungeons. In Season 4, we experimented with our existing dungeon difficulty progression to offer additional endgame options for players who enjoy more methodical dungeon gameplay. This was the moving, basically, the difficulty of Heroic and Mythic Zero dungeons up, and arguably adding hard mode Dawn of the Infinite as like a, sort of like an untimed plus 10 that you can do. This updated dungeon difficulty progression is also an opportunity for players that do enjoy Mythic Keystones to have a place to build mastery over dungeons before the pressures of a timer kick in. You can read more about those changes in depth here, which is going to be that earlier post. We've already read that. We plan to continue this model of progression into War Within with some exciting updates. Normal. This difficulty is unchanged. This difficulty always includes our 8 War Within dungeons. Heroic. The tuning and rewards of this difficulty are increasing to be equivalent to a baseline Mythic dungeon in the previous system. When they say previous system here, they're not referring to Season 4, they're referring to before Season 3. So this is unchanged as a Season 4. It already works this way on live right now. New mechanics and other adjustments from Mythic won't be present, and it remains queuable, although it looks like this is not going to be queuable until Season 1 starts, so for the first 2 weeks, you're going to need to actually go there yourself. They're going to be on a lockout rather than the kind of queuable non-lockout system that you can get with random heroics. And yeah, that's how it's working on beta right now, and how there's some strings that suggest that in the data mining. Starting with Season 1, Heroic difficulty will feature our roster of seasonal dungeons. So this is a big change. Now we're going to have basically right now in Season 4, all the Dragonflight dungeons are in the season, so you wouldn't really feel a difference with this. But imagine if it was like Season 2, and instead of having Heroic Algathar Academy in the rotation, that's no longer available, and Heroic, Vortex Pinnacle and stuff is instead, which seems good. That seems like a good thing, especially given that you can get some, decently reasonable item level rewards out of Heroic, that if there was a particularly good dungeon trinket from a dungeon that wasn't in rotation, it would be kind of weird if you wanted to farm that dungeon on Heroic to get it. It's sort of like it's just weird whenever there's stuff that is available at certain eye level brackets, and then if it's overtuned enough, then you're hunting it down in some low content. And also, this helps with the goal of being able to actually build mastery over the dungeons, the ones that are in that season. However, this does mean that if you're a Heroic dungeon player, which I assume a lot of the player base that kind of caps out at Heroic dungeons probably won't actually like this. This will be nice for the people that Heroic dungeons are a stepping stone to higher content, because it helps make it a better stepping stone. But if you're a kind of player who logs into each WoW expansion, very casually, maybe you play for a few weeks at the start of the expansion, and then you touch it for a week or two every patch or so, this is probably going to be pretty jarring, and you'd maybe rather have Heroic just be the War Within dungeons. I'm not sure on that. I'm not sure how many players fit that bill, but that's my suspicion. Mythic, the tuning. So this is, again, the Season 4 change on the tuning. No timers, affixes, or limitations to changing specs. The goal is to create a mega dungeon-like difficulty for this experience, should present a meaningful challenge and provide commensurate rewards without the pressure of the M+ system, and it will feature our roster of seasonal dungeons, and it will be unavailable until Season 1 begins, and it'll now have a daily lockout, changed from weekly in the previous system. Now, Mythic dungeons on a daily lockout would be pretty important for min-maxing if they started before Season 1. But since they start at the same time as Season 1, then it's going to be the same time that you have Heroic Raid available. There will probably still be some benefit to doing daily sweeps of all the Mythic difficulty dungeons for the first 2 or 3 days of that week, but pretty quickly after that, I don't think people are going to have that many upgrades from those dungeons if they are the giga min-maxy players. And then for other types of players, it'll be nice that the dungeons just are on a daily lockout. You're less likely to be locked when your friends want to do Mythic dungeons, so that seems good. The seasonal dungeons are the following. This was already known, but it's Stone Vault, Dawnbreaker, Arakara, and City of Threads are the War Within dungeons, and then Grimbatol, Necrotic Wake, Mystotyrn, Scythe, and Siege are the returning dungeons, which, I've been doing this content with Max over on his Twitch stream and then on his YouTube channel. You should check it out. It's pretty cool, where we talk about various like dungeon and raid topics, do some lists, do some drafts, that kind of stuff. And one of them was worst dungeons of all time, and I'm sad to report that multiple dungeons from this list were in multiple people's lists on that video. So we'll see. Hopefully, they've got some good tune-ups to them to make them better when they come back here. M+. So M+ is going to carry forward. Rewards up to level 10, starting with a +2 that would have been a +11 in the previous M+ system. Again, this is a Season 4 change. This is already live. And this is also already live, but the basic idea is that the growth is the same, right? Going from a +2 to a +5 is the same as going from, in the previous system, or in the new system is the same as going from a +11 to a +15. Although I guess technically there's one extra number in there that's gotten hidden away there, right? If +2 is the same as +11, +3 would be the same as +12, +4 would be +13, +5 would be +14. Oh, wait, but it's supposed to be +15 here. So they've snuck one level into their equivalents here, but it's all kind of wishy-washy anyways. The main idea is that the slope is the same, which, again, if you've played Season 4, you're familiar with that. But we intend to better align the difficulty, reward and difficulty increases by updating the introduction points of affixes in Season 1. So +2, Fort and Tyrant come in. +4, a new set of passive affixes. And +7, Bursting and Bolstering. Bolstering, etc. Every time there's an affix change post, they always burst our bubble, or bolster our bubble, as it were, pretty early by reminding us that Bolstering is still going to be in the game somewhere early in there. But a new set of passive affixes coming in at +4, and notably +7 is going to be where that third affix gets added in. Now, one of the things about Season 4 that's been interesting is that the third affix doesn't get added until +10 on Season 4, which creates some good things and some bad things. The good thing is that if the level 10 affix is bad, you just don't have to play it, right? And you can farm the highest level stuff, basically, out of +9s. You're missing out on a tiny bit of value from your vault, but other than that, you're getting the highest level stuff. So the good thing is you can dodge those annoying affixes. But the flip side of that, from Blizzard's perspective, is like, oh, hang on, this is a weird play pattern. We don't like that. Now, you could look at that as Blizzard and be like, players are having more fun without this affix. They're choosing to farm lower level content just so that they can dodge our affix when it's bolstering. Maybe we should have a think about whether the bolstering is something that is making our game more or less fun. Unfortunately, they didn't have that thought, and they've instead just brought it down to a lower key level. But looks like we've got a new set of affixes, so I'll hold my scathing criticism until we read the rest of this post, at least. But yeah, bolstering sucks. I hate it. Dungeon ratings should be equivalent to what they were in the previous one, and there should be a smaller range of keystone levels to find groups for, more meaningful progression between each level. Again, this part is very easy to figure out that this part doesn't make sense, right? Like, if a +5 is as hard as a +15, and a +10 is as hard as a +20, where is the more meaningful progression between each level, right? Going from a +5 to a +6 is one key level, and going from a +15 to a +16 is one key level. So this part has always been suspicious for me. Smaller range of keystones, sure, they've lopped off a bunch of keystone levels, so those are now in the M0 difficulty. But more meaningful progression between each level would indicate that they've changed the slope beyond just the kind of one key level math thing that has gone away here, which it doesn't happen. So this part is always has struck me as weird. I guess you could make the argument that affixes are getting added in this key level range where they weren't before, but that's the only thing you could say there. Okay, affixes. Before we dive into the specifics of the new affixes, we would like to outline our goals and purpose these affixes serve. Our overarching goal is to minimize the mechanical overlap between affixes and dungeon trash design in the +4 bucket. We aim to achieve this through a more passive approach, focusing on the following objectives. Shift the source of challenge to the dungeon itself, by simplifying affix design and emphasizing creature abilities, reduce visual noise, nameplate cutter, and coggy load on players during trash combat, allow for varied and context-specific gameplay decisions, depending on the dungeon they're applied to. These seem like great goals, so cool. Additionally, these affixes will include a positive effect. Wow. This has been something they've been extremely reluctant to experiment with in the non-seasonal affix spot, despite it being, I think, a very common, every time I stream, 3 or 4 times throughout the stream, somebody comes into their chat and types their manifesto of like, here's what they should do to change the game and make it better. Invariably, one of those things is always kiss curse affixes, affixes that give you some kind of benefit as well. And Flizzers has been asked about this a few times in a few of their interviews, and they've given various, lawyerly answers about why they don't like it. But it looks like many of these things, they have been thinking about it behind the scenes, and they are actually going to give it a shot here. So the aim of these positive effects is to highlight different damage types each week, allowing each spec additional opportunities to excel during the seasons. They should feel like a bonus, offering an advantage for different damage profiles each week without being essential to complete a dungeon. Players will have opportunity to flex towards different talents, gearing options, and consumables to capitalize on these effects. So this is an interesting way of doing positive effects. This could mean that, every spec might have a chance to be viable just because it benefits well from a certain level 4 affix, and then, it can get its score and get rank 1 on the ladder that week. It's a very thin line where you can make these effects feel good and impactful and not just be like, well, this is stupid. I don't get a benefit from this affix this week. I'm not going to play this week. So we have to see exactly where this lands, but it's ambitious. Let's see what we got. Reckless, new affix. Non-boss enemies without mana ignore armor with their attacks, but their armor is reduced by 30% and they take 10% increased arcane damage. Okay, so you're going to basically do more physical damage and more arcane damage to trash mobs, so non-boss enemies without mana. Interesting take on this. So this is what they mean by different damage profiles. It's not like AoE or single target necessarily, but it is, in this case, physical and arcane will do more damage on this week. Thorned. Non-boss enemies without mana inflict physical damage to their attackers when attacked, but take 10% increased holy and shadow damage. This one seems very, very likely to be suspicious, because how do you make it a amount of physical damage that people will feel without it being an amount that is going to just turbo nuke people? That is a very narrow range there. You can see this with abilities, Thorns-like abilities, even at the start of Old Man Legacy of Tyr, but also in every other game, any game that has some kind of damage reflection ability, it is an extremely narrow range before you go from insignificant incoming damage to one-shot yourself incoming damage. Probably the best way to do this would be with an ICD on how often a player can take damage from this, and just a flat physical damage event, and then this first one sort of punishes tanks. The second one sort of punishes melee DPS, and is going to reward holy and shadow damage. So we're rewarding, Affliction Warlocks, obviously Shadow Priests, Rep Pallies, those kind of specs. So actually not a lot of specs that deal holy and shadow damage. Attuned. Non-boss enemies with mana inflict increased magic damage, but they take increased nature damage and increased damage from bleed effects. Okay, nature and bleed. Now, there are a few specs that deal nature damage, although not a lot of specs that deal, predominantly nature damage, but this one is a decent little buff for a lot of specs. And then bleed, of course, we're looking at assassination rogues, arms warriors to a lesser extent, feral druids, prot warriors as well, I guess. So, and 30% is a large amount to throw on that bleed effect, I think in particular for assassination rogue, who deal a lot of bleed damage, so that might be a big assassination rogue week. And then finally, focused. Non-boss enemies with mana have increased haste, but take increased frost and fire damage. So that'll be a good week for mages, just like this will also be a good week for a different type of mages, which is good. Okay. Note these tooltips indicate whether the affixes apply to creatures with or without mana. They will not affect every creature. Interesting. So the following affixes are going to be retired. Afflicted Incorporeal. The 3 seasons. These affixes got 3 seasons, which makes them now the least long-lived affixes, I think. Maybe there were some Legion affixes that got less. No, I don't think so. I think the Legion affixes all lasted all of Legion. And then, of course, there was Inspiring, which is a Shadowlands one, but that lasted 4 seasons of Shadowlands. So 3 seasons for these two, and they're gone. And Entangling as well, and Storming and Volcanic. Okay. I'm pretty happy to see Afflicted and Incorporeal go. I will say these three, well, Storming as well, I'm maybe pretty happy to see go. Entangling and Volcanic were affixes that were fun. They were fun because they were low impact, but they were fun to play. So anytime the fun stuff is going away and bolstering is still going to be there, I'm sad. To match the number of affixes, the 7 bucket, so they're retiring Spiteful from the 7 bucket. Okay, you're going into the bucket where bolstering is, and you're not retiring bolstering. Spiteful, okay, so Spiteful's getting retired. The 7 bucket now has Raging, Bolstering, Bursting, and Sanguine. We're still experimenting with Tyrannical and Fortified affixes. We're still experimenting with how these affixes fit in with our updates. We believe these changes will offer a refreshing experience for players at all levels each season, redefine how the affix system influences dungeon gameplay. We look forward to your feedback and discussion on these topics, and we'll see you in the dungeons. So, it's interesting. I'm glad they're trying stuff. My first guess is that, so these are supposed to be what, like, these affixes, you could maybe forget they were on a keystone and be okay, right? Like, like, oh, I guess it's Reckless Week, right? Like, my tank is in a little bit more distress, right? And, like, maybe if you're min-maxing it, you're going to get some value, right? Maybe a mage on the margin is going to choose to play Arcane over Fire. But I think for the most part, like, 10% increased damage in these categories, it's probably not enough to necessarily, like, change what is good in certain keys. It's like a nice bonus if you're playing those, so that's probably fine. Maybe the 30% bleed thing, again, for Assassination Rogue is something, and maybe for Feral Druid as well, like, is something where it's like, oh, all of a sudden Assassination Rogue has gone from being good damage to being topped by a lot on this week. And I think that would be a little bit of a concern, would be, like, if one of these affixes just ends up being like, oh, this is push week because this is, we do 15% more damage as a group on this week. But I don't think that is too likely. I guess the 30% armor reduction, if your group is all physical damage dealers as well, could maybe be a week where you are doing a lot more damage. I like replacing some affixes with more passive ones as well, right? Like, even if we don't think these are particularly good and impactful, being not bad and not impactful is, I think, a pretty good place for one of the affix rows to be. Now, again, I'm happy they're taking out Afflicted and Incorporeal, because I never really liked the way these affixes were sort of like, well, I hope you brought a comp that can handle this, and I hope that the person in your group who could have talented a Dispel or who could have talented a CC has chosen to talent that and is choosing to click that. Very frustrating experience if you weren't the player that had that agency, watching the rest of your group kind of not do it. That was something that I really didn't like. I don't like keeping in bolstering. I don't like keeping in saying, like, this means that half of the weeks are going to be bolstering or sanguine weeks. Another quarter of the weeks are going to be raging weeks. Like, these are the affixes that prevent me from enjoying keys more than anything, is raging, bolstering, and sanguine. So those are actually going to be more of a percentage of keys than they were before, because they've taken out Spiteful, which Spiteful is an affix that prevented you from enjoying keys as a certain spec sometimes. But raging, bolstering, and sanguine, like, sanguine is just such an exhausting affix to be on keys. And then, so, like, 25% of weeks are going to be bursting weeks. I don't know. I think they should rethink basically the on-death affix row, the level 7 row, and maybe swap this back in for, like, what if we just do these instead, and we combine Afflicted Incorporeal into, like, a new affix that kind of has the both, you have a mob spawn that, I guess you can't really do this, but it could be like a neutral mob that could be dispelled or CC'd or, like, anything to it. I guess then warriors still couldn't do anything to it, so that would be bad. But I don't know. I feel like we're shooting some affixes that are fun, and we're increasing the prevalence of some affixes that suck. But I guess we're only going to have one affix from these two buckets, right? We're only going to have one of these, and then we're going to have these, which, again, these affixes are probably low impact enough, depending on the tuning of Thorned, to be not... Like, the downside of these things is pretty minor. The biggest one is the ones that affect enemies with mana. But the ones that affect enemies with mana, there's more counterplay available to those. So if you're at a key level where, 20% increased damage on a caster's cast is going to kill you, you can stop that cast. I guess the most dangerous thing is if there's ever like mini bosses that have mana and are getting buffed with this but aren't actually interruptible on some of their damage. That's going to be really annoying. But aside from that, I don't know. I think this is a cool direction to go here. I do think that when we're talking about positive effects on the affixes, this is going to be pretty imperceptible for a lot of players. Like the way that you're going to perceive this is if you have damage meters turned on, you're maybe going to notice that, hey, I'm doing more damage this week. But it's going to be like by such a small amount, unless, if you're an arcane mage, it's like, oh, cool, 10% damage buff on this week. Cool, right? But like if you're just a class that has, 20% of your damage is random shadow damage procs or whatever, you're not going to feel it at all on Thorned weeks. I think the things that people have liked about affixes with positive effects in the past have been things that you could feel more, like stuff like the Woe Drifter, where you're just like zooming for a little bit, or you get cooldown reduction on the relic, right? Those were the positive effects of the encrypted affix, or stacking up like a boatload of a stat, which is the shrouded affix. Now, these affixes aren't seasonal affixes; they should be lower impact, but maybe if it was just stuff like when you kill an enemy, you get a stacking 2% movement speed buff that lasts for like 45 seconds, and it stacks up to 20% movement speed, right? And it's like, cool, if I can keep this buff stacked, I can get a 20% movement speed buff for the rest of this dungeon, and we feel like we're zooming a little bit, right? Like it's not a huge sprint, but it's something, right? Like I feel like those sorts of positive effects where you actually would feel it would maybe be a better way to do this than choosing specific schools and buffing those damages. But I think it's still, like, the biggest thing about these affixes is that they aren't, these affixes, right? Like, that is an upgrade. Upgrading into neutral from negative is still good. I'm curious, though. I'm curious to see how this plays out. I'm going to try and go into it with an open mind and, play the keys, see what they're like. So hopefully there's key testing soon. We don't actually know when key testing is going to be available on the beta, but we do know that raid testing is starting this coming week. So look forward to me spamming your feed with heroic and mythic raid testing videos. Actually, I'll probably schedule these out so that it's one a day. So starting on June 13th, we'll have one raid testing video per day for the next 2 weeks. So it should be fun. Anyways, hope you've enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of all the affix changes and stuff down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.